folks. And so when I talk about decolonizing mental health, that's really like the foundation of it, just that there's a different way to heal. I hope to get across the idea to folks that there isn't like one way to do therapy. And I think that sometimes there can be this stereotype that it's like only talk therapy, this thing that like a bunch of ancient old white dudes started, and this is the only way that you're going to feel better. And it's just not true. And when I think about our BIPOC family friends, and how their experience is just so different compared to maybe the white experience or any other experience, I think that we have to remember, that there's just like different paths and different ways to connect with folks.
Stay tuned, stay curious. Enculturation Podcast. Melisa, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here and giving me your time and energy. And I'm looking forward to diving into your specialty, right? So tell me a little bit about how you got into mental health.
Yeah, well, first of all, Vin, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here and connect with you and community. And to answer your question, how did I get into mental health? Wow, I think that the roots of it really started just being young and feeling like a natural listener. It seemed like it was really easy for me to connect with folks and them to share their stories with me. And I think that is probably like the root of where I first got the idea of when it came around to thinking like, oh, well, what could I do, like when I grow up? And it was definitely like a journey that led to this because, like now I'm in my 40s and I just finished grad school for psychology. But everything along the way was like a stepping stone to helping me be the therapist, the provider, the person that I am today.
I am impressed and amazed that you thought about mental health at a young age because I feel like mental health, especially for me being an Asian American, is very mysterious. So I'm curious how you even thought of like, I'm going to be I'm going to pursue mental health. Like,
I think I knew about psychology and like supporting and the helping professions because my mother was a nurse. That was like her career forever. She finally retired a few years ago. So I think I knew about it in that sense. I probably didn't have the words or the language of like calling it mental health or, wellness at that point. But I think too, like growing up as a competitive figure skater, this idea of like sports psychology was something I was kind of exposed to at a really early age. And I want to say, yes, like growing up also in an Asian immigrant household, mental health, like going to talk to a therapist, that was all like very taboo. And so it is interesting actually to reflect and think about that I hadn't considered like, wow, this is something that maybe wasn't accepted at a certain point in my life. And then now, I don't know, 2024, it seems to be celebrated. And I think that that's hopefully a good thing just for the collective that it's spoken about more. And it's an okay thing to be in therapy and to get help or feel like you need someone to talk to.
Yeah, totally. I hope this episode adds to that okayness.
Me too.
I have a friend who is Latin America, and I think his perception of mental health can like summarize maybe a lot of like his people his age, right? So he's older. And he always asks me, hey, even is mental health a new thing? Because when he grew up, there was no mental health, but now his kids are like, mental health, Dad, mental health,
Yeah. That's really, I don't know, it lightens my heart and like warms my soul a little bit to hear stories like this, because it's like you see research or things on the news, everything comes with like its own little bent. You don't know what to trust. I am always very take it with a grain of salt when it comes to research. And not that I totally write it off. I'm just like, well, we don't know. You know what I mean? Like some people got together, did this study, they showed up with this. But I really think like the qualitative aspect, the anecdotal stories and like lived experience say so much.
Yeah, I believe one of the things that you're really passionate about within mental health is the decolonized mental health aspect. Could you guide me into more of that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I realize too, like that terminology can be expressed in different ways. When I say decolonize mental health, I hope to get across the idea to folks that there isn't like one way to do therapy. There isn't like one way to, or one path to growth, personal growth, wellness, and healing. And I think that sometimes there can be this stereotype that it's like only talk therapy, this thing that like a bunch of ancient old white dudes started, and this is the only way that you're going to feel better. And it's just not true. And when I think about our BIPOC family friends and how their experience is just so different compared to maybe the white experience or any other experience, I think that we have to remember, that there's just like different paths and different ways to connect with folks. And so when I talk about decolonizing mental health, that's really like the foundation of it, just that there's a different way to heal. And
Yeah, what are some of the other ways within decolonize mental health or mental health in general?
Yeah, so I guess if we're putting kind of like talk therapy in one pile, there's so many other practices that can get into the body, for example, where folks that maybe have experienced trauma, like it's not safe for them, or they can't even like really access their stories, or that it would be re-traumatizing to tell them. They can still work through that trauma through their body, whether it be through like, movement, music, like different forms of expression therapy, art even. And then also for other folks, depending on your comfort level and your cultural background, tapping into Indigenous practices that oftentimes in certain rooms, sadly, in our country and all over the world are just kind of like dismissed because there's no research or it's not evidence-based. But it's for me, it's like if it works for you, if it feels good to you, I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that people just, discount way too quickly.
So what I hear is you're talking about a no one size fits all solution, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think that part of decolonizing mental health is really, truly like being client-led. Like people will talk about that. Like, oh, I'm a client-centered therapist or whatever. And of course, we all go into a room with preconceived notions and our own perspective and our experience. And at the same time, we can know that we have this experience and kind of put that to the side so that we can fully be present with someone to hear their story and really understand what it's like to be them. Because even though we can say like, oh yeah, I belong to this community, I identify with this race or like this gender identity, that doesn't mean that someone that also identifies like that has had the same experience as you or even like defines it the same way. So I think taking the time to be curious and like really get to know like, okay, well, what does it feel like you, I don't know, for example, if someone says they come in and they feel depressed, I pause and I'm like, okay, well, my idea of depression is this, but maybe that's not what it is for them. So to really ask those questions and give them a chance to say like what their story is. And I don't know why, but it seems like for some folks, that's really hard to do, to give that space to truly get to know someone and those details before you're jumping into like, oh, I have the answer for you. Like, I know it will help you.
Yeah, so that makes me curious about the definitions of things, right? Especially like the clinical definition. So, there's obviously a clinical definition, and from what you're saying, there's also like a personal definition, right? So, like, where does the two meet? Like, how, like, when do you say, okay, you actually have this, or maybe you have this thing instead, even though you feel this way?
That is such a juicy question. Thank you for asking it. I guess let me give a little background too on how I practice. I come from community mental health where we were trained in a way that's like not just the biomedical model where a client, or oftentimes people refer to their clients as patients. I do not do that. I don't see our relationship as a hierarchical situation. I am here to support you. I walk next to you. I'm not leading you. I'm not above you because I have whatever letters after my name. And so, yeah, I think that because of my training and looking at the whole person, I am really intentional about not over pathologizing. I don't look at my client and be like, oh, I see this, this, and this. Okay, then that, some formula runs through my mind and like calculator of psychology says, ta-ta, you have anxiety. It's not like that for me. I'm looking at like this bigger structure, all times considering like systemic oppression and looking at the communities we move in and how those aspects affect how we show up as individuals, and understanding that oftentimes the things that are looked at as disorders are really just a manifestation of the systems that we're forced to live in. And so it's not the person that's the problem, it's the problem that's the problem, if that makes sense. So as far as like working through DSM-5, diagnoses, and then me over here, like not trying to label anything, I only will diagnose if a client asks me to. If they really feel like somehow that would be supportive to like name the thing, then we'll have a conversation about it. And I'll say, okay, like if you wanted to, for whatever reason, and the thing is too, having it be a collaborative experience, not me like, okay, we're going to have this meeting and then I'm going to go away into my like Wizard of Oz behind the curtain thing. And then next time we meet, ta-da, here is your like spreadsheet of information. For me, everything is collaborative. We talk through like, okay, do you think this is you? Like on paper? And just really giving the client a sense of agency and empowerment so that we can come to whatever that diagnosis is together.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think there's times when, as humans, I definitely know I fall into this. Mm-hmm. I like to believe I'm human,
Hey, me too, I think. I hope.
Yeah, when I read something, it's like, it's easy for me to fill in the gaps. Like, oh yeah, I'm this thing, or I'm this thing, like you could give me any list and I'll be like, yeah, I think I'm that thing,
Yeah.
So that seems like it would be tricky to get an accurate diagnosis per se, based on like whether someone associates or identifies with this thing, because maybe they're easily influenced or easily like relatable in that way, and maybe that relatability is not an actual big percentage of their experience, but in that moment they're like, yeah, I'm definitely this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. I'm glad you mentioned that, because even if someone is given a diagnosis at any point in time, like you said, we are human, we are malleable, flexible, we're changing moment to moment. So just because a diagnosis is given at one point doesn't mean that can't change. And I think that's the other thing that's a bit dangerous with diagnosis and over-pathologization, is because some folks can really like glom onto that and feel like so identified that it almost like changes how they see themselves. So yeah, that's why I just like tread so lightly and carefully and just try to have a lot of conversations about like what it can mean, because sometimes a certain diagnosis can stick with someone and be in your paperwork forever and can literally change the course of your life depending what that diagnosis is. So
yeah, that's very well said. I can see it changing not only the course of your life, like in the therapy world, but also in how you perceive yourself and how others may perceive yourself if they somehow find out about that diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So speaking of diagnosis, let's talk about what is or are the strength-based approaches, and how does that relate to trauma-informed care?
Yes, thank you. I think you can tell from the look on my face, I'm such a fan of trauma-informed care because, again, it puts the client like truly in that driver's seat. Like, go back again. I missed the part about, trauma-informed care, and then what was strengths-based approaches. Yes, that is like one of the major tenets of trauma-informed care. There's a whole like list of things, which I'll name a few, but really that client-led situation where it's a collaboration versus me like prescribing you things to do. We're really talking it out. And the strengths-based piece is really important, because rather than a focus on the Like, okay, client A comes in, they're like, here's my issue. This is a problem. This is everything that's wrong with my life. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, we can speak to that and name that. And also, like, what are the places, feelings, I don't know, activities where you feel alive, where you feel supported, joyful, resourced, and focusing on those things, not to make the other things go away or say that they're not there, but rather than to focus on the things that feel like issues, you are focusing on the things where you're kind of uplifting the client and reminding them that they do have strengths. Because in non-trauma informed care, it's really easy. It's almost like the formula to focus on the problems. And whether folks believe it or not, it's like where your energy flows is where where your attention goes is where the energy flows. So what are we trying to grow here? You know, like which plant are we trying to water? And for me, it feels more supportive to help folks grow the plants that feel good to them, that they like, not the weeds.
Yeah, this concept reminds me of similar principles within nutrition or your diet, right? So like if your doctor or nutritionist said, hey, don't eat bananas, and all your meetings was like, don't eat bananas, and you're like, okay, well, what can I eat? Right? So I think that's what this is getting at. It's like, well, what can you eat? What makes you feel good? What can you nourish yourself with, rather than focusing on what you can't have?
Yes, it's working with what you have. Yeah, exactly. That is a big piece of it too.
What about like any alternative works from people like Brene Brown and so forth?
Oh, yes. I mean, there are so many people I could mention. And I think one person, you did mention Brene Brown, and I really appreciate her focused on like a different approach to trauma and really embracing it. And kind of like the beginning of our conversation when you mentioned, what was it, like the taboo part, or like mental health not being something that's necessarily like okay to talk about or even, mention. I think that part of Brene Brown's work has really been shining a new light on trauma. It's like, actually, everyone has experienced something. Everyone has like some level of trauma. Like it's not a fad, it's not a trend, and that it is okay. And fitting into trauma-informed care, how to turn that trauma into strengths where we can.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's not a fad and it's not a trend, which I do agree. But I also feel like there is a certain level of overusage of the word, maybe or it's like using the word in situations where it doesn't warrant the word, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that kind of devalues people who actually go through traumatic experiences. What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, that's a big one. But this is an awesome question. And it's hard to judge. I can say that I've had a similar experience where, whether it be scrolling through social media or like coming across a video and someone maybe using the term in a way that I wouldn't. But I think if I zoom out far enough, I think the fact that it's just out there more is better than it not. Like, I guess what I'm saying is I would rather see people out there using it wrong, or let me take that back. I don't want to use judgmental words here. Using it maybe inaccurately to me, because that's that person's truth in that moment. And I think this also goes back to the idea of like, what is trauma-informed care is being non-judgmental. Like that is making sense for that person in that moment. And like, who am I to try to bring in also some like spiritual kind of like Buddhism beliefs, like instead of looking outwards so often, like what other people are doing or not doing, looking inward and seeing like, okay, what can I do?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess there is like a lot of value in the word being accessible and the word circulating in someone's consciousness, where they are able to like acknowledge that they have this experience, and maybe with time, with like so much usage of it, there will be like a fine line between like when does this word really make sense and when does it not make sense, right? And having like a strong communication just from practice of it.
Yes. And actually, too, that whole thing about language is like, okay, like right now, today, these are the words that we have to use with the vocabulary to speak like about mental health. I'm thinking of this idea of like varying genders and sexual identities, and how over time we can see that like language has been built up and there's like so many different more words, phrases, ways to identify. Like maybe that will also be the case with mental health. Like maybe there'll be more language that folks can use to more specifically describe what they're going through, so that, yeah, we're not in this situation that we're describing now where people are calling whatever it is trauma. And maybe to another person, it seems unfitting. And yet, like when I pause and think about honoring someone's story, I'm like, well, who am I to tell you? I wasn't there. I don't know. Like I would rather hear people's stories and people feel comfortable to let that out than people keep it in and be silenced, because I think that that is a huge step forward or some food for growing this, I don't know, foundation. Like, I don't know, I keep going back to this garden analogy of folks just feeling more comfortable to speak about their experiences and just be real.
I feel like it's almost mandatory to talk about social media when it comes to mental health. Yeah, because I feel like social media is this huge experiment that there's been no point in human history that we had this experience of having connections, right? Whether it's like a like or a comment on a post or someone sharing your post, and then that gives us a false sense that, oh yeah, this person is connected to me. And then like, what do you feel like that is social media's influence on our mental health nowadays?
Ooh, we could go down a very big rabbit hole. I will start by saying I think everything we're exposed to, right, is affecting us, touching us in some way or another. And I feel like because we're kind of like living through it now, there's a lot we don't know about future effects. And honestly, it feels a little scary to me, especially too, like as a mother of 3 young children, thinking about when they're of the age to have their own phones and have their own accounts. I'm like wanting to support people's autonomy. And also it can be a scary, unsafe world out there. And so I think that it's super important for folks to be mindful about curating their experience and what you're taking in through all of your senses, including your eyes and your ears, in linking this back to social media. Because yeah, okay, something, I don't know, you might watch something because it's funny, or I don't know, watch something because it's scary, it elicits a certain feeling in you, but just at least having the tool of being able to pause and check in and see like, okay, like how do I feel watching this? How do I feel after? Like, what is my mood like? Because I'm not one of those folks where it's just like, no, social media needs to go away completely. I am more of a like everything in moderation.
Yeah, there's definitely positive benefits from it, such as I have some family members that have benefited greatly from social media, because from their perspective or from my perspective, I can easily just go out and be part of a community, like physically in person, but not everybody has that, depending on whether they're an immigrant even, or they speak good English, they may feel like isolated, secluded. So in some situations, they can have like what in their world is a real form of connection through social media, because otherwise they would have no connection depending on where they live.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me about the connection part, because yeah, this is also reminding me of the whole strength space thing. It's like everything that I think shows up in our life or that we bring into our lives, like social media, can be a strength or a detriment. It's just kind of figuring out where that line is for you, of where it is still supportive. Like even things that people might pathologize or say is a disorder, like, oh, I have anxiety, and that is like blanket statement, like a bad thing. Like actually though, like what is that anxiety? What is the purpose of it? And how is it serving you? Because I think in a lot of situations, your body and your mind are trying to protect you. And so maybe the example of like dissociation, it could be really handy to be able to check out sometimes. Like we can't always be in the kind of like true realness of all the things that are happening in our world all the time. Like we would be spent. I feel like I personally would just crumble taking all that in all the time. So yeah, maybe you need to, I don't know, have some Netflix time or dance or watch a show or go for a walk. And someone might say that like, oh, you listen to too much music and like you're dissociating or avoiding life. And it's like, no, actually, this is what's helping me survive. Like even when it comes to substances, I think like to a certain degree, these are protective factors and can be looked at as like strength-based resources for people.
Yeah, you mentioned something interesting earlier, actually, a lot. Let's start with curating. So when I hear the word curation, I think of algorithm, AI, and I'm always wondering whether my AI like is showing me a part of me that I didn't know existed, or it's trying to like carve out a part of my brain that doesn't exist for its own benefit, So, for example, when one of my friends first signed up for TikTok, right?
Yeah.
For some reason, TikTok kept showing him videos of disabled people, right? Like, and or videos of, or my TikTok kept showing me videos of animals being eaten. I'm like, what? Like it's a brand new account. There's no way it knows anything about me. Like, why is it showing me this?
Right.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. So I wonder what the effects of like these algorithms and AI on our mental health is, like whether it's showing me stuff that is kind of creating this side of me that I didn't know exists. Like why I never search up. Let me show me animals being eaten on my Google ever. So there's no search history of that, right?
Right.
But for some reason it kept showing me, and part of me was like glued to it. I'm like, oh, this is. I want to see what happens,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'm like, why is it doing this to me?
I'm curious too.
Yeah.
AI is really, really interesting to me, just as an average human, but then also too, working in mental health and as a therapist. I was talking to someone recently and they were like, you could be replaced by AI. Like someone could just decide to have a conversation with AI and be like, I don't know, I'm feeling bad. Like, what can I do to help myself? I personally think that you can never replace the human connection, and that actually in truly deeply helpful therapy and personal growth, you need that. There is a saying out there that true healing can only happen in relationship. And I mean, I guess you can say, oh, well, you're having a relationship with the AI. I don't want to discount that if someone really finds that supportive and helpful, sure. And going back to your other idea about like, is this me? Or is AI kind of opening up new parts of me? I feel like it's bringing me back to moderation. You know what I mean? Just remembering to like keep perspective on like, this is a computer. It's feeding me things. I get to choose who I am. I am an autonomous being. I don't have to feel my identity from what's coming up on my feed, and to remember that there is so much more out there in the world. I was thinking about this the other day because I was like, oh, at one point I was spending more time on Instagram, and I feel a lot better now that I have a little bit more boundaries around it, because yes, I appreciate the resources of connection. And yes, it's super fun to like geek out on memes and send them to friends from time to time. And I just noticed that my world almost felt smaller in some ways, that it was literally like in my phone. And I was still connecting with folks like in real life, in the wild. But for me, felt like there was a little more tunnel vision than before. Seemed to like, I didn't forget, but I lost like the strong connection that I had with like the collective, it felt like, and understanding that there was more out there. Like there was unknown, and just like keeping that in mind when engaging with social media.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the topic of social media and AI taking over jobs, I guess mental health professional jobs, I feel like one of the fundamental things of having a human do it is the ability to, one, form a connection, right? And I think fundamental to form a connection is building trust. So, like, how do you build trust, or not? How do you or therapists in general build trust to a new client? Because especially if that client is like, maybe they've never seen their therapist ever before, and then this is their first time opening this world and they don't know what to expect.
Oh yeah, oftentimes it is the case that we've never met before. Yeah, I love this question. I love all your questions, because that is like at the core of my personal philosophy of how to practice therapy, is really putting like first and foremost, like not only the sessions being client led, but also building that relationship. Because if you try to dive in too fast with folks, like they're only going to tell you what they feel comfortable telling you. And if I am really, truly trying to be of service to someone, then part of that is taking the time for them to feel comfortable. And so I think part of it for me is how I come into the therapy space, like whether it's in person or whether oftentimes it's over Zoom these days, really doing my personal work and work of self so that I can come in grounded and calm and open. And whatever, some folks might be like, that is so woo-woo. I really have seen it make a difference to come in maybe like a little more stressed or even feeling rushed, like, oh, I logged into Zoom a few minutes late, and having that be the energy we start with. So yeah, I think that, the energy that I bring as a practitioner to a space makes a lot of difference with building that trust, and also validation, like giving people the space to tell their stories and not tell them that it's wrong. And let people build their truth with you and share it like as they're ready. And the spaciousness, not feeling like there's any timeline to get to know someone. Because really, like, you can't rush healing anyway. Sometimes there are like prescriptions where someone can only see you for a certain number of sessions. And still yet I try to remember, like, I can't force anything to happen. I can't force this person to say whatever or reach a certain point. So really just that presence of like unconditional, empathetic energy, I think goes a really long way to building that trust that you're asking about.
Yeah, it seems like just listening is fundamental to building trust versus listening to reply, right? Do you feel like there's any part of our culture nowadays that just creates the need to listen to reply and kind of like fix a situation and jump forward ahead and skip all this work? So for example, and this is on my own journey, it's kind of personal, I'm going to share this for the first time, right? Recently I learned the difference between moving on versus healing, right? Yeah. And I realized I'm very good at moving on, but I'm not good at healing, right? Yeah. And how I learned that is through a certain experience where I was telling someone what I went through, and they were like, oh yeah, so take all what you're learning now and apply it to this next situation. It, like, kind of just let's move on from that thing, and here's how it's gonna like be better and all this stuff, without just acknowledging the emotional weight of the situation first, right? Yeah. So what are your thoughts about like the need to listen versus listen to reply, and like moving or versus healing on?
Yeah, I think that, at least in my role as a therapist, like my job isn't to heal or cure or fix anyone or anything. I feel like the holding of space, whether that might sound really simple or like you're not doing anything to some folks, is priceless. Sometimes people have grown up and never felt like really heard, or feel like there's even like space for them to say how they're feeling. And so we just learn over time, if no one is there for that, either we decide not to express ourselves anymore, or there's like fear around that. And so that is actually something I have to practice very deeply, is being able to listen and take away this being in rebuttal mode, which I learned in a recent like brain spotting training, that term of like listening, but while you're listening, the wheels are turning and you're like, oh yeah, I know what I'm about to say to that and that. And then you have like this list of things where it's like, when it's my turn. Yeah, it is a skill, and it is a very active thing to be able to listen and just listen. And to be able to be like, I hear you, Vin, and leave it at that, and like that be okay, because I think in turn that validates the person in another way, that their experience is okay, even if it was like a shitty thing that happened, rather than like, yes, like I am a recovering people pleaser. I know all about like trying to help and thinking I can like fix people, and like if I do this, then they'll be happy, then we'll both be happy and everything will be perfect. And yeah, I learned the very hard way that that is actually not possible. So even when you think it feels like you're helping, or like in the moment someone feels like they have relief, I don't think like deep down you're actually supporting that person. So the whole like listening to reply thing, it varies depending what the connection is. But if we're talking about me as a therapist, I think that me not replying more often is actually more helpful for folks. Like it would be different maybe if you're having a conversation with a friend, right? And you're actually looking for their opinion. But as a practitioner, like that's not my role. Yeah.
What are some alternatives to talk therapy, and what kind of results are, and who would be like the right fit for these different type of therapies?
Oh, okay. I have one that's just like so top of mind right now because I recently got trained in it, and it is brain spotting. Like this modality is the epitome of client-led care. It was born from EMDR, which is eye movement reprocessing desensitization, and it's known for its ability to support folks working through trauma. So it is similar to that practice in that it does have to do with like eye movements. But the beautiful thing about it is you can say like as little as or as much as you want about what you went through and the healing and the processing. Like going back to what you were saying about like healing and moving on being different things. It's like moving on is almost like a survival thing, right? Like we can't be in the grief forever. We need to find a way to exist on the day-to-day, moving on. But actually like processing the grief and letting that go and leave our bodies, not to say like this thing didn't happen, but just to give your body space to be able, well, not just your body, your heart, your mind, your soul, to move on. If we're like speaking in the term of relationships, especially. But brain spotting, I feel like I can't think of someone who wouldn't be a candidate for this therapy. It's like non-ableist. Yes, you use your eye movements, but you can be like low vision or not have any vision at all to be able to use it.
So help me get a better picture in high resolution of what brain spotting is. So let's say I'm in a facility and then my eyes are being measured. What does the eye movements mean? What does that mean?
Yeah. Okay. I'll back up a little bit and tell you kind of like how the therapy works. So I wish I had like my brain, whatchamacallit, with me. But okay, here's another thing that also will tap into our conversation earlier about like decolonizing mental health. So like with talk therapy, you're using the neocortex, which is kind of like this upper part of your brain. It's for analyzing, it's for talking, it's great for day to day, getting around as a human, right? But our bodies and our minds, our beings actually store trauma in a completely different part of the brain, in our limbic system, where it's like our emotions and our feelings. So when a traumatic event happens and that energy is not being able to like processed and be released, that's how we end up with trauma, which trauma is not the actual thing that happened. Trauma is how our bodies and minds are responding to it after and holding it. So somewhere along the line, your nervous system didn't get to process that thing that happened and release it. So for example, like someone could be like interrupted in their crying about a thing, and the crying is actually good. It's them releasing it, or not good, but helpful, right? So with brain spotting, you are focusing on that limbic system of the human brain and body, where those emotions, where that trauma is stored. And it's almost like you can't talk your way into healing that, because that's not where it is. So by having folks think of an issue or speak of an issue, recall the issue that they want to work on, and then you kind of have them scan using a pointer and like watching the fine movements of their eyes and their facial expressions, see where they're most activated. And then you have them look at a focal point, and then they just process, which can look like them talking through what they're going through, like as they're staring at this point. You can have your eyes closed. It's just really the position of the eyes, because like I said, you don't have to be able to have vision to do this. And I mean, I've had it done a few times, and it's life-changing and mind-blowing, the difference between a session of talking to someone, which can be really helpful. I'm not saying don't do talk therapy, but I want folks to know that there's other modalities out there, and this is just one of many. But by allowing people to really get into their feelings and their bodies and letting their trauma process in that way can open up a lot of space for folks.
You mentioned that trauma gets stored in the limbic system. Is that, and not the prefrontal cortex, is that one reason why that when triggers happen for certain people, it kind of overrides their normal behavior, because it's like the primal part of your brain? Is that right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, that lizard brain that's so old, and whose literal job it is to make sure that you survive. So it can't tell if you are having a stress response because, I don't know, you were crossing the street and a car came too close and now you are jumpy, or if you're actually like literally in danger. Or yeah, I mean, another thing is too, I've read that your system can't tell the difference between a quote unquote good stress and bad stress. So even if something is feeling fun, but like your heart rate is up and you are like stressed biologically, it doesn't know the difference between that and someone like maybe chasing you, supposedly. I don't know. Like I said, take the research with a grain of salt. But yeah, that's exactly right. It's that triggering experience is where that part takes over. And yeah, it's almost like you don't have control because your mind and body was trained to survive from whatever early age, or because if something happened to you, this is what I need to do.
Do you know if there's like any research or even in your experience, like a window of storing trauma or a window of when trauma can get released? So for example, my first time scuba diving ever, right? Yeah. I was on a guided tour. So long story short, I ended up throwing up underwater.
Oh,
so
wow.
Try to picture that for a second.
Right. That's talented.
So vomiting underwater, when I went through it, I can't imagine anyone or most people would have the experience of vomiting underwater, because the two normally don't mix, you know? Yeah. But when I vomited underwater, I was operating with my on land procedure, meaning like I was trying to clear out my throat, you know, vomiting underwater. But you can't do that underwater because salt water gets in.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So long story short, I started choking, and then so when you scuba dive, there's different commands you can give to communicate what you're doing. Well, the whole thing's body language based, right?
Right.
Yeah, and so I was giving a signal to my instructor, hey, I want to go up. Is it the command? I want to go up, right?
Yeah.
And he said, you're okay. And he was helping me purge. Purge meaning you take your regulator, your air device, and you blow air. It blows air out, right? And so you're purging whatever is in. And so obviously I was choking underwater, and I had like a moment of panic, and then it happened so fast where there wasn't time for me to like, okay, you're safe, calm down, everything's okay. You know, I was like, I want to go up, right?
Yeah.
and You ever hear of that saying that when you're nearing the end of life or a near-death experience, you start seeing light at the end of the tunnel?
I have heard that.
Okay. So I was underwater and it was originally very dark, right?
Yeah.
And then as I'm telling him to go up and then there's bubbles blowing all over my face from the irregular coming out and him helping me, my vision started getting lighter and lighter and lighter. And in my head, I was like, I think this is the light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, so basically what happened was, in that moment, I accepted that I was gonna die. I was like, all right, this is how I go out. I'm gonna this is it, you know. And it almost felt like an ayahuasca experience. I haven't done ayahuasca, but I was like, maybe this is what people say when they go through like this long tunnel and all these other things, right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, it turns out the reason why my vision got brighter is because he was actually floating me to the surface. So like before you know it, I was actually at the surface of the water, and that's why my vision got lighter, right? Like so.
Yeah.
But the reason why I bring it up is because for some reason that experience actually did not leave me traumatized, right? Yeah. So, but when I tell most people this story, they get like secondhand trauma for me. You know?
That's real.
Yeah, right. So they're like, "Oh my god, are you traumatized?" And I'm like, "Actually, I'm not, because I decided to come back later to a different spot and later on, years later, and actually get certified. And now I'm actually a certified scuba diver, right?
Wow.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Congratulations.
But that experience was like something about that experience where it sounds and the experience itself was pretty intense, but for some reason, like I made a conscious choice to not let it traumatize me, you know?
Right.
Whereas other things that maybe I'm not as aware of or conscious of, that leaves like what I would assume to be hidden trauma that I don't even know about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about the window of storing trauma or releasing trauma.
Yeah, that is so real. Also, thank you for sharing that story. That is vivid. I might be having secondhand trauma right now for you also. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that story deserves a moment. To your question about trauma, whether or not there is a window for processing or not. And I guess I want to start by saying that is a great example because different people can experience the same exact situation or very similar situations. And you never know which person is going to walk away and feel traumatized and which ones aren't. And there's so much that goes into that, right? Then I won't go down that rabbit hole at the moment. I will stick to your question. But as far as there being a window, two things. The first thing is I came across this really interesting article back when I was in grad school where apparently, again, grain of salt with research, apparently if you play Tetris shortly after, I think it was like within 72 hours of an experience that one may find traumatizing, that it works a part of your brain where the trauma would potentially be stored or like created and kind of cancels out. So it gives, it's like, that part of my brain is busy focused on the Tetrising now. So it has less energy, time, and space to be focused on producing the trauma response and experience. And I'm like, dang, if that's true, like everyone needs to know about that. After I read that article, I was like, I don't know if it's true or not, but let me download Tetris on my phone. Got like the phone case that you can play Tetris on the back, just in case. So there is that may be supportive for people. And also, I don't believe that there's a window. I haven't come across any research saying that research and or qualitative research, quantitative or anecdotal experience of someone saying that like this many years has gone by. Sorry, you're just going to have to live with feeling however that feels now for the rest of your life. I really do like to think that we are malleable. There is always opportunity for change.
What do you think of the usage of ketamine? As far as, because I know it's very trending right now to use ketamine for therapy related or maybe like minimize the response to trauma.
Yes, it is super popular right now. And I would say that I am for it if it is someone who is a good candidate and it's done responsibly. And I say that because there are services out there online where you can enter my info, say I want to work on this thing. They send you ketamine in the mail with like instructions and you do it in your home. You are all alone. There is no support other than maybe like call our 1-800 number if you feel yada, yada, yada. That to me worries me. That doesn't feel like a safe way to do ketamine therapy. So I think if folks are being responsible and they do their research, and yeah, I wouldn't say it's for everyone, just like I think other forms of psychedelic supported therapy aren't for everyone. I mean, that probably goes to be the case for any form of therapy too, I would say. Yeah. And I really want to lean into that client-led thing. It's like, I would never tell someone off the bat, like, no, you don't want to do that. It's like, let's talk about it. Like, why does that sound interesting to you? Like, how are you planning to do it? And yeah, if you go into it intentionally and thoughtfully, like, yeah, I'm not personally against it.
Yeah, I think this relates to the topic of decolonized mental health, right? Because there's certain things that's labeled as a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 substance in America, but other cultures, we're like, yeah, this is totally our medicine. We've been doing this for thousands of years. But America's like, actually, no, this has no medicinal value, right? And so that seems to me like straight up a form of colonization. Like you're telling someone else that what they're doing has no value and you're overriding them. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, my thoughts on that are I agree. Yeah, I took a course on psychedelic medicine that really went into kind of like the history of how psychedelics, like in, I don't know, the quote unquote mainstream in our country, like kind of came to be. And it is complicated because also I personally want to give a lot of respect to Indigenous cultures that cultivated the use of plant medicines. And I'm not over here like, it worked for these people, everyone should do it. I think that it needs to be approached with a lot of respect and understanding like where these things came from. And I feel like if someone is interested in doing something that's maybe not okay in our country, to champion them to look into where maybe it would be okay to do that. Because, yeah, I really don't think that anything that has to do with your own body, I get that there are some things that are maybe safer than others, or maybe there's like more risk involved in handling it a certain way, but I really, as much as I can as possible, want to leave that up to you.
Yeah, it seems almost, at least in my mind, like level 1 common sense of, do you want a choice of these things that this culture has been doing for thousands of years safely with no side effects, or do you want this thing that we made in a lab that has tons of side effects but's legal here?
Yeah.
Which do you choose? To me, it's like, well, if you put it that way, it's hard.
Right.
It's hard to say no to one of them, right?
Yes, that resonates with me. Absolutely.
Yeah. So going back to brain spotting, is there a device that you're wearing on your head, or how's your eye movements being measured?
Oh, yeah. No, you're not wearing a device at all. Really, the only gear or equipment that one would use is a pointer. Yeah,
Okay.
a little handheld pointer, and it's held by the practitioner. So everything is just observed visually. I'm just watching you very closely. And these are like tiny micro movements that we're looking for.
So does that indicate that there's something stored there, or it indicates that you're releasing what's stored there? Like, what does that indicate? Like these eye movements.
So I would say at the beginning of this session, as we're opening the brain spotting, what we're looking for is the activation. Well, I mean, this could get really detailed. I'll just keep it really high level. So yeah, for the basic brain spotting session, we're looking for where there's seems to be the most activation, and that can be something also that like I am witnessing and that you are witnessing, and that we come together to decide on where that spot is. Or it can be client led, where they tell me like, okay, when I place my eyes here while I'm guiding them, this is where it feels the most alive for me. So I like that about it too, where it's not, I can be the one to choose the spot, the focal point, and it can also be you as the client.
So once a focal point is discovered or agreed upon, like what happens after that focal point is made available?
Yeah. As the client, you would just do your best to focus there. And as the practitioner, I'm doing my best to hold that very steady for you. And you just process. Yeah. You stare at that focal point and let whatever comes up. And like we talked about before, the processing of trauma is often not directly related to that part of our system that deals with the language. So oftentimes the sessions can have very little talking. The client can just be staring. Maybe big emotions will come up for them, or they'll want to move their body in a certain way. But it's not necessarily them like staring and being like, okay, like if you were my therapist, okay, Vin, so then this thing happened and yada, yada, yada. I can speak from a little bit of experience of my own. There have been some sessions where, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what's coming up for me. There have been some sessions where I say zero, and maybe it's just tears on and off the whole time. And then for me, I'll check in with you when it feels like a good time. And though I want to be really careful not to interrupt the client's process, because as they're processing, I don't want to inadvertently bring them back into their neocortex if they're in it. And it's like, you can tell, like if you're really present with someone, you can see when they're kind of in that zone, even if they're not talking. And so I'll be very thoughtful about when I check in and see how you're doing. And then, yeah, I would leave maybe the last few minutes to do any like light processing if they feel like they need to talk about something not in like a therapeutic like session kind of feel, but just like, okay, like is it okay to put the pointer away now? And
yeah, so brain spotting seems like more universal than talk therapy, it seems, if language is not a precursor. Because to me, talk therapy, I do feel like it can be very complex, because depending on what someone's language or someone's communication level in that language is, it may not be their most expressive ones, and their native language, if it's not English, for example, may not have like the words that correlates to the English, I guess, mental health symptoms equivalent.
exactly. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why I know I'm over here sounding like the biggest brain spotting cheerleader, but the fact that it can be accessible to a wider audience of folks feels really good to me as a practitioner, to be able to support more people. And this new idea, kind of like on the thread of language that I feel like we've been talking about throughout this conversation, and like cultural competency, and also like assuming if someone says a thing, like that I understand what that means to them. Yeah, it can kind of bypass all of that, because yeah, there can be so many miscommunications even when we are speaking the same language. Like you said, if it is someone's second language and maybe the translation is not quite right, or a whole host of things, right? Like in some cultures, there is no word for depression, for example, but that doesn't mean that no one in that culture is depressed. So yeah, I hear you. And yeah.
So how might one help elders of those communities, that's a non-English community? For example, right now, the first that comes to mind is all that's happening in Palestine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not sure the full extent of it, but definitely a lot of stuff is happening, and that I would assume needs like decades of healing, right? So, but in a non-English speaking community, it seems like less awareness or less availability is for mental health. So like, how would those communities even know to seek help? Like, where would they go?
Yeah. That's a really hard question for me to answer, like being here, like so far removed. I think what's coming up for me though is if by any chance there are folks listening to this that do have access or maybe are closer by, to not minimize the effect that helping someone meet their basic needs can go. Like, I'm thinking about the realms of community health that I was trained in and work in. And a lot of the times, it's like, how can someone be in comfortable mental health when their housing needs are not being met, when they're not well fed, so they can't rest? And getting down to those basics and trying to start there and work at that and really have people that truly care around them, speaking about elders and challenging situations in that particular geographical location and elsewhere. I think that can be a simple first step for folks that aren't even trained, just being humans with each other as a first step.
Yeah, well said. How does colonial history influence the current state of mental health treatment and the perception of different communities? Let's say if I was African American and I went to see a therapist who happens to be white, there might be biases there. Like, how would that play out?
Yeah, I mean, that also, generally speaking, would be hard to say because it really depends on the two people coming together. I feel comfortable talking about that kind of like in general terms, that from my experience, oftentimes folks can feel more comfortable speaking, like what you said, right? Building trust, speaking to and opening up to someone that they feel more comfortable with. And sometimes that is a person that they share culture or race or some kind of connection with. I think that there's a lot of focus on being culturally competent. And I say that with this face because there's so many different levels of training and understanding of what that means. And I feel a little fired up about the fact that some people think that they can take a cultural competency training, like as a continuing education thing, like in the evening or over a weekend, and think that they know someone based off of that. I think that's where the danger is of like, yes, make the effort to get to know and understand that there's different cultures and different experiences out there, but don't think because you took that training that you know this person that's sitting in front of you because it's like, oh yeah, I learned about like the Black experience in America. And so now I automatically know what it's like for this Black person to be in my office right now. So really going back to that curiosity piece. It's like, okay, well, what is it like for you? And like, yeah, it's cool and very helpful to know like maybe some generalizations of what it could be like, or at least like be informed by history and hopefully history told from a lot of different viewpoints to get closer to what might be the truth.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head of being informed, but not turning that state of being informed into a state of like understanding or relatability. Like, even though you may have read about it, but experiencing the situation in that culture or that body is completely different than what's communicated through text. What about where do you see like the power dynamic shift happening between client and provider for mental health?
Well, okay. In my kind of circle, I feel very hopeful because a lot of the folks are of a similar mind with me, with being client led and it not being a hierarchy. of just because maybe I know some stuff and I read a couple more books than you, then somehow I'm like better than you, or I know the answers. And at the same time, like real talk, I know that there's still folks doing therapy out there that do call their clients patients, that are diagnosing and judging from the get. And I understand also that that is a systemic problem as well, because if you're accepting insurance has all these little boxes you have to check, and like you need to have a diagnosis and a treatment plan after like the first session in some cases. And so I see, like, I'm not always trying to blame the individual therapists for doing their job, how they're doing it. I do see how there are some systemic issues that feed into that. And I would like to think that hopefully it is moving more towards a client-led situation, just from what I see.
How does someone go about reclaiming joy in their life from being a place of, I don't know, depressed or whatever they may be going through?
Yeah, well, I guess what's coming up first is that I think that there may be room to feel depressed and also reclaim joy. I don't think it's super binary or black and white, like I am depressed and that's all there is. And maybe sometimes it really does feel like that.
I think that that's a good point you brought up, because when I read stories about suicide on the internet, going through some of the comments, like it's typical for it to be like, oh, this person seemed so happy the other day, or this person seems so well put together. It's totally surprised and shocked.
Yeah. And yeah, it's life. It's complicated. Like there's so many layers and to each of us and what we decide to put out into the world and what's underneath. But I guess kind of on a hopeful note for anyone who might feel like they're struggling, first of all, that I feel like it is the human experience to feel challenged and have hard times and to struggle, and that is okay, even though maybe some capitalist paintbrushes that have made the picture of our world would like you to think otherwise. Like, it's okay. It's okay. Like, it might feel uncomfortable that things feel hard, but that there's nothing wrong with you if it feels hard sometimes. Like that's a piece of it. And then just to start off small, like even if it's, I don't know, it feels good when I do a little like self massage, or this idea that like self-care can be sustainable and it doesn't have to be really like big gestures of having to spend a lot of money on, I don't know, a massage or getting your nails done. And that's self-care, and I need that to feel good. But like figuring out the ways that work within your life to find that joy.
What are your thoughts on the intersection or overlap of self-care versus self-love?
Oh, yes, Vin.
Because I feel like those two are very similar related, and they might be mistaken for none another, but they're not one for one the same thing.
I agree with you. They're not the same thing. And I don't think I've ever spoken about the difference like out loud before. This is definitely like something I've thought about in my head. So like, thank you for the opportunity to like put words to it. I think, okay, self-care and self-love. In this moment, they both feel like verbs to me. I mean, I think love in itself is a verb. It's like the acts, the motions that you go through to express love, like that is love. I think, yes, it can be a feeling within us, but it is a living thing. So when we're talking about like self-care and self-care to me is bringing up action to express self-love. Does that make sense? I'm trying to think of a better way to say it. Like self-love feels like a true, deep appreciation for myself, no matter how I'm showing up. like all the parts that feel ugly or maybe like someone wouldn't want to see, or you feel afraid to show someone, and all the things that you're cool with putting out there. And I think, yeah, they can be intertwined in that practicing self-care can be an act of showing self-love. But yeah, they can be very separate. I don't know. What do you think?
I feel like the self-care can be an extension of self-love.
Mm-hmm.
But self-love is, as you said, definitely the deeper aspect of it, right? Like loving yourself through all the times, when you mess up, when you are not at your best, when you're at your worst, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I feel like self-care has become trendy, and it's not bad trendy, but it's like people have mistaken it, in my opinion, for the deeper parts of self-love. Like, today I'm getting a spa self-love day, or I'm getting I'm gonna get juice self-love, right?
Hashtag self-love. Yeah, that is so true. Because one can, and I'm totally just like talking this out in this moment, one can potentially like engage in self-care, and that doesn't necessarily like translate to how much self-love you have.
Yeah.
Right?
I speaking from my experience, I would say that's right. So there's times when my relationship with self-care goes against self-love, right? And here's how that works.
Yeah.
Is, let's say I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go work out, and then when I don't work out, I'm like, oh damn, I didn't work out. My mind is like, you didn't work out today. Now you're being unhealthy. It's all this stuff, right? So I'm like beating myself up in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is a great example. I also do that. Yeah, that is very real. I really like that question. I mean, for me and for folks out there, just to kind of great food for thought.
What would you say are the new frontiers or new discoveries or even new pillars or directions that's happening like on the forefront of mental health?
Ooh, forefront. Okay, that feels challenging because I feel like the things that to me feel like they're at the forefront are actually things from a very long time ago that are slowly being accepted as, what's the word I want to use? Credible, perhaps? Kind of going back to what you were saying about plant medicine from other cultures that used for however thousands of years, and now maybe in some circles are like, oh yeah, maybe that is supportive or resourceful or can help people. But I see folks tapping more into Indigenous medicine, reaching back into ancestral roots. And I mean, that can be really healing for a person too, just to kind of get into their own personal story. And those connections can even be healing. But that was another thing, that I really took away from grad school, that there are more places and in community settings that are supporting that type of healing and it being accepted, at least by some circles. So while it's like, to me, feels burgeoning, it's not necessarily like a new technology. It just feels like people are opening their hearts and minds to practices that have been around that maybe got shoved to the side.
It's exciting that we're finally at this time when these things are better accepted, right? Yeah, better accepted.
I get the sense that they are being more widely accepted. I hope. I try to keep my mind really open because I know that these are things that I'm interested, right? So maybe I have a different view. But yeah, it does feel hopeful that it seems to be talked about more in the mainstream. So
yeah, I just hope that it keeps the right parties involved in the conversation. So, for example, on the plant medicine side, there's a company out there, forgot which company, and anyways, this company is trying to patent psilocybin. So that's crazy to me, right? It's like, how can you just patent a piece of nature that, and I also saw this thing on the internet. There's some kind of clinic in Portland or Oregon, yeah, somewhere in Oregon, possibly Portland, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is offering some type of psychedelic therapy, and I saw this picture of like literally where this place was.
Uh-huh.
It was a wooden shed inside a parking garage. Okay. And for the price of $15,000, you can have a psychedelic session here inside this parking garage. Yeah, so that seems like not the direction that we should be going in.
I hear you. I have not come across that particular shed in that particular garage, but now I'm very motivated to go check that out. Yeah, okay, this is the conundrum. So it's like, maybe not the conundrum, a conundrum when we're talking about psychedelic assisted therapy and walking this line of regulation to the point of wanting folks to be safe, and then also respect for where these medicines first came from, and then also like in the middle of that, folks trying to take advantage.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive because the cultures who have been doing it for thousands of years, they have so much knowledge and experience of like this whole process, right? And I guess if we're talking about like in product development terms, they've made all the mistakes already. They've learned the craft, right? Yeah, and so it makes more sense to go with someone who's done all the work versus someone else who just did a weekend cert or maybe a 2-year cert on this other program, and now they're like an expert, but that person in that group has never interacted with these other cultures, right? So it's like seems like yeah, straight up another form of colonization to me.
It is. It really does feel like that to me too, and I'm glad you brought that part up because yeah, it really does fit under this umbrella of decolonizing mental health. And it's tough because I see some trainings out there that do try their best to be responsible and have cultural advisors and are trying to look at the whole picture and take into the history. And then, like you said, there's other folks out here doing something very different, like trying to patent nature.
Yeah, are you familiar with the decriminalized nature movement?
A bit.
Yeah. To me, that so far seems like the sweet spot. I'm not saying it's the answer because I don't have an answer. If I knew, I would probably be pushing it out a lot more. But I think it's important that we are aware of these things and able to talk about it. Because I used to be like, yeah, let's legalize it. Let's make it accessible. But then I realized what legalization leads to or can lead to because of capitalism, right? So it leads to a company coming in and mass producing this thing, and you get bottles or maybe a vending machine and all this other stuff. But I think the big part of plant medicine is the ceremony behind it, the ceremony and having someone guide you who knows what they're doing, creating a space. So it's not just a substance. There's like a guidance behind it, right? So the legalization seems to not be the best promoter of that, right? While decriminalized nature seems to be the sweet spot because you're still allowed to practice what you practice without turning into like a massive business. And since it's not legalized, these corporations can't come in and be like, yeah, we're going to turn this into $1 billion industry or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
How can the mental health field support and amplify the voices of marginalized communities?
I think by hearing their stories, by there being more BIPOC, LGBTQIA, sex affirmative, kink affirmative, if all the marginalized communities could somehow be more represented as far as practitioners, then I think that would be a place to start. I often hear from clients that have been looking for a therapist for a while, like how hard it is actually to find even just a therapist of color, like at that, not to mention all the other things I listed, because similar to what you said about the ceremonial aspect of psychedelic assisted therapy, and that holding of space and how important the ceremony is. It's almost like a ceremony. It can be to do therapy in that presence. And really, sometimes it's not, I don't want to say not about the things that are being said, but how important, and not to just like throw away the ceremony around it.
How can people best support you, and how can people best support mental health as a whole?
Oh, mental health as a whole. I feel like I want to start there because I feel like a big reason why I was so excited to connect with you and like speak on these topics is because I hope folks out there hear that there is a different way to do therapy, and that even if maybe someone has not delved into wellness or mental health on their own journey, or they have and they had an experience that was unsavory, there's so many different ways that it can go down and it can happen, and you just have to look, and hopefully it's more easeful than not to find that. But we're out here and we want to help, and that is me. And I think that I want to answer the other part of your question, and really just saying I want to be of service to folks. Like I don't like a lot of attention. I really want to help people along their paths and their journey, because I feel like any little effort or ounce of energy that's put into love or uplifting community will reverberate. And so if folks want to connect to find more resources or are interested in therapy, whether it be talk therapy or brain spotting, if it's with me, client-led, you get to choose. I'm there to support you. But I have a website, Lumago Wellness, and the name Lumago, it's spelled Lumago, is actually a Tagalog word that means growth, kind of like uplifting. And I wanted to bring that vibe of hope and possibility to the name of my practice. And I'm happy to be able to be community minded and offer sliding scale to folks. And yeah, I'm on Instagram under the same handle, and I'm really just here to support and serve. I hope that comes through.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Really quick, have you ever been back to the Philippines?
Not yet. I was just talking about this last night. I was with my family because I finally had my graduation ceremony. And we had a big Filipino dinner with my closest loved ones there with me. And I was listening to all these other people talk about their experience having been to the motherland. And I'm like,
Yeah, because the reason why I asked is I would be curious about what you would see or observe as far as like the conversations in the Philippines in topic of mental health,
yes, I did a training once in a traditional healing arts from the Philippines. And so I've tried to tap in as much as I can, not actually having like stepped foot there, but I'm going to go soon, speaking it into existence, and I can report back when I do.
Yeah, we'll do a part 2. Any shout outs you'd like to mention?
Oh my goodness. Family, friends, loved ones, my kiddos. You know who you are. I love you. Wouldn't be here without their support. Thank you so much, Finn, for this opportunity. It's wonderful to connect. I feel like I could speak with you for hours.
And final closing thoughts for our listeners out there. What would you like to close out with?
I think what's coming through in this moment is be kind to yourself, to others. Just know that like every ounce of love that you feel or give, like that will get passed on, and to have faith in that.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate having you here, and looking forward to doing part 2 in the future.
Yes, thank you, Vin. It's amazing.